Because of the way the universe is created, we each of us live in two worlds at the same time. We have to live in the outer life of our own bodies and the inner life of our own souls.
Hello and welcome to Living the Inner Life. I'm your host, Chris Sheridan, and I want you to join with me on a journey into our inner lives, our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, everything we have that helps determine how we interact with and respond to the outside world. And if we can use these tools of consciousness, we can have a better experience, both inner and outer, in our total life. All right, so one of the tools we use is memory. We have to remember things, especially things we've learned. We don't want to relearn over and over again things we've already learned. And it's been said that if you don't take a lesson from history, if you don't learn from history, whether your own history or the collective history of our culture, then you're doomed to repeat it, okay? To repeat the same mistakes if you don't learn from your history. But sometimes our history is not complete, all right? Before, say, 12,000 years ago, there's what's known as the dark curtain of history, this dark curtain beyond which we are unable to see. We're unable to know. Apparently, there were cataclysms. There was an ice age, most likely a flood when all that ice melted. And it probably destroyed any record or artifact or really any evidence of what lie before that dark curtain of history, at least as far as human civilization and culture is concerned. All right, now there are markers, there are clues, there are cues about history in the rocks with archaeology, with geology. We can look at evidence and indirectly come to some conclusions, or at least some very important working theories on what may have happened at what time and what was going on in the world with plant and animal life, perhaps how it got destroyed and then renewal, regrowth, rebirth happened. And so from about maybe 6,000 BC till this time now, about 8,000 or 9,000 years, we have some record of our human culture history with stone tablets and megalithic structures. And all the time we're finding new ones. We're discovering new artifacts, new buildings, new constructions that are mysterious because we don't know who built these things. Where did they come from? What was the purpose? What was this people like? And with flooding and shorelines encroaching, with jungles overgrowing some of these structures, there are entire cities they're finding beneath the jungle canopy. All right, so there's so many things that we don't know, and I think the more we realize, the more we know, the more we find out that we don't know. Okay, so there are a lot of blank parts. Okay, this dark curtain of history that we can't really see, a lot of unknowns, not only going back before a certain time, but since then, between that time and now, there may have been and are places and spaces that are missing. Okay, a missing link, a missing year, a missing century, perhaps. There's even some people think that up to 1,000 years of our civilization history may be inaccurate. But we have decided that this is the timeline and that historians and anybody who's talking or referring to history and historical times, different cultures at different times in different places, we use this timeline. Whether it's exactly 100% or not, I don't know, but it serves as a common baseline where we can compare and talk about different parts of our collective human history. All right? So this dark curtain of history is not just for civilization or human life on Earth. It's also with our own individual lives. Certainly before age 4 or 5, maybe 3, I can remember to 3, and since then. But before then, We don't seem to remember as much. Maybe some people do. Maybe some people actually remember a past life. If that's a thing, I'm inclined to believe that's certainly a possibility. But most of us don't remember. Not that it wasn't registered, but we don't seem to retain some of that knowledge that happened before, say, 4 or 5 years old. Okay, so that's one dark curtain of history. And ostensibly, we've been able to remember most everything because we were there since then, growing up, going through school, moving, living out of the house, military service, college, career, marriage, kids, whatever happens after that as we grow up and become adults and live our lives in this world. But every night, there's certainly those hours spent sleeping that we don't really remember. That's kind of a daily dark curtain of our own personal history. We may have a dream episode that we remember. We most likely dream all the time, every night, at least to some degree. We may not get that really deep REM sleep where that vivid dreams can really come about. But we have this nightly gap, okay, in our personal timeline. And we, I guess, know that we're in the bed or wherever it is we're sleeping, and then we wake up and we're still there. So we know maybe where we were and what we were doing was sleeping, but we weren't really cognizant. We weren't conscious of all the things happening around us, unless, of course, something wakes us up. Okay? But what I want to shift to is some of these other parts of our history where we can turn a blind eye, whether consciously or unconsciously. We can choose not to look. Okay? We can choose to look away or not think of something or not remember something. I know a lot of people who have missing gaps in their memory timeline. Years of school, say maybe elementary school, where very little is remembered. Maybe nothing really was all that interesting. I'm not really sure. There can be various reasons for these blank spots, these spaces of unknown time in our lives. Like I just said, sometimes that can be just because there wasn't really much memorable or there were other things that happened later. Or the opposite can be true. Maybe things at certain times were very, very difficult, traumatic perhaps. And we don't remember that because somehow our mind or consciousness blanks them out. So we're not so burdened by those memories and reliving a very difficult time or event. So there can be that sort of protective mechanism where this amnesia, if you want to call it that, this not remembering, may serve a very real and practical purpose in our lives. So we're not just overly burdened and dragged down by old memories of events to where we can't move forward and live with our lives as we want them to unfold as we go on. Okay, now I was in a plane crash. That's how I broke my back about 30 years ago, a little bit more. And I was cognizant throughout the whole thing. I remembered everything. I heard the plane hit the ground when I hit, and there were no blank spaces. But I, since then, have talked to many other people who have been in plane crashes, many of them pilots as well. And a lot of them don't remember. They don't remember calling a mayday on the radio. They don't remember how they really got involved in a situation where they ended up crashing. The impact, maybe there was a lapse of consciousness because of the impact, but don't remember really what they just woke up in the hospital and what happened. And I've thought about that a lot because sometimes I think, oh, geez, it would sort of be nice if I didn't remember all that stuff because it was pretty intense. But I also know from my experiences talking with these people that a lot of them feel frustrated with that. They're like, I wish I had remembered what happened. It bothers me that I don't know, that I can't remember. I'm sure those memories are recorded and might be accessible, maybe through therapy, hypnotizing, meditation. It may be possible to do some sort of regressive exercise with the therapist that can bring out blocked memories, locked memories. If it's worthwhile to bring them up, and they can be useful and somehow be part of the healing process. So as a result of that, I'm actually grateful that I remember. I remember every single second of it, it seems. And yeah, sometimes that's a lot to remember, or a lot to take in, a lot to take on, a lot to carry around with those memories. But ultimately, I think it's better. I feel better having remembered and knowing what happened. At least I don't have to wonder. I still may have to figure out exactly what happened and why aerodynamically and some of those other questions, but I don't have a blank spot. Okay, I really remember. I remember even things that went way beyond that. I had an amazing experience in the plane. I'll do a whole podcast on that soon. And that has helped me with continuity. There's just a way of that everything is together, that my timeline is mostly intact, I think. But then again, I don't know things that I don't know. Okay, if I'm not aware of a memory, if I don't remember something, I may not even be aware that that even happened, let alone the specific memory, but even knowing that there is a blank spot. So this dark curtain the curtain itself may actually be invisible or mysterious or elusive in some way. All right. So what can we do about that? Well, with larger history, like the timeline of our race, the human race, our civilization, our culture, going back thousands of years, it really helps to know what happened and why, so we can learn about earlier civilizations, cultures, find out what happened, what did they know, how can we benefit from knowing that. It's part of our heritage as being a world citizen, that anything and everything that has happened to anybody over time, over history, is really part of our collective, our shared history. And there is so much of that we don't know. And I think the danger is when you try to fill in the blanks, when you know there's a blank and you don't know what was happening, then the tendency is to take, and it's logically true that you would want to do this, take what happened before this blank spot and take what's happened after the blank spot and somehow try to interpolate or extrapolate through that what maybe would have happened in between if we have this bit of evidence as the last thing, and then you have here this evidence that is the first next thing that happened after this blank spot. Well, how do you get from here to there? And that could be a very logical, very reasonable, perhaps even correct assumption or theory, or it could be wildly way off. All right. And another danger is in the not knowing. Like I was talking about these pilots that I know who had plane crashes and don't really remember certain parts of it, that can be a source of anxiety or frustration. I wish I knew what happened. I wasn't there. I think that's a general feeling we all have, that it's better to be informed. Okay, nobody wants to be left out of a conversation, at least one that affects themselves, because otherwise then you'll be ambushed when stuff comes out. You want to know what's going on. You don't want to be left in the dark. And then here we are with this dark curtain of history. But it goes way beyond just our own personal history, our own timeline of this life, in case there are many lives before and after, but we're really kind of talking about this one. But what about this life? Okay? We don't really know our origin as a species, as a race, a human race. We don't know our destiny. We honestly, a lot of times, I don't think we know why we're here individually or collectively or in general. What is life? Why are we here? Does it have meaning? Is there a purpose? What do I do? Where do I go? What bus do I take? All these mysterious questions that beg an answer, and we may not be able to piece it together, so we do the best we can. I know Stonehenge, the megalithic monument in England, we see it, and we've got these pillars and the stiles that go across. And as late as, recently as I think the 1940s or 50s, they were kind of laying on the ground. So what we see today is really not that old as far as the reconstruction, but it was done based on what was still standing, what was laying down on the ground, and the angle at which they had fallen, at a best guess at putting it back together was made. So this Stonehenge that we see may or may not be the exact original configuration. Plus, there may not be all the pieces left. Okay, it could just be a very partial ruin and a relatively modern reconstruction. So we can reconstruct our own lives, but I have a feeling, and I'm just inclined to believe, that since we don't know who we are, really, as people, what it means to be human. What is our origin? What was our original programming? What was the purpose? How did we get to where we're here now? There's a missing link. It's not just in DNA and Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal and this whole process of Homo erectus and becoming a Homo sapien and human being and all this evolutionary stuff. Even that, even the fossil record has missing pieces, blank pieces, this dark curtain of history. So we have to piece it together. And it is possible, I think, to get closer to that, to get closer to discovery and a realization on what we're all about and why it is that we're here. I have a feeling, a very strong feeling, and this is something I want to, as we go on, talk more and more about. When I did one on what is the meaning of life, I really kept it to mostly what's the meaning in our own lives, personally, because this is all about the inner life. But I think it might help our individual lives and how we go about living our lives, inner and outer, if we knew more about what we were designed for or how we evolved into this, if there is a purpose or a reason. What about our capacities? That may have been lost. A lot of this history and these blank spots, there seems to be anomalous readings, like there's something out of time, a mechanism from 2,000 years ago shows tooling and construction and knowledge of the universe and our solar system that, as far as we have been able to reconstruct our timeline, we didn't know then. But if we can date this object as being made and had all this expertise in it centuries before these things were supposedly discovered, well, then that's a problem. It's, history and everything likes things to be neat and follow a certain plan, but it doesn't, and neither do our lives. Okay, so just like these artifacts that seem out of time, there may be parts of our lives, our greater life, that we don't know about, that may have been lost throughout history. Maybe we knew. Maybe forefathers or ancestors from a long, long time ago knew more about who and what we are, and that has been lost, whether it was lost through just the sands of time, or maybe it was suppressed and then forgotten about. Maybe some of that knowledge is still around and it's just hard to get to. All right? But I think as far as we can at least approach our own personal dark curtain of history, these blank spots, and this larger idea of who and what we are. And think about that and try to embrace a larger history, a larger version. It may not be just as linear as we would like it to be. Maybe there are bursts and areas or times where things were thriving and things were not. There's probably cycles that we go through. But to look at our own history and embrace that darkness, okay? And if you have to fill it in or feel the need to fill it in, well, why not approach it with the best thing you could fill it with? All right? Maybe there's something larger or greater than what we're aware of on who and what we are and what we're supposed to do. Okay? So that's likely been lost, and I'll put lost in quotes, doesn't mean that it can't be rediscovered. It may be in our DNA. It may be in a deeper part of ourselves, not only our own personal history and these blank spots that can be recovered, but maybe our larger collective history, our collective plight, our collective purpose and meaning. I have to think it has to be something more than just solving everyday problems and getting through life and getting through another day. That can be quite an accomplishment. Okay, sometimes that's the most and the best you can do with your time in your life is to make it through another day and hold it together. Okay, because there's a lot of pressures, there's a lot of challenges. But in the larger sense, there has to be more than that. Maybe we've been playing too small. Maybe our history isn't as small or as powerless as it seems to be. Maybe our heritage, which is part of our history, is something greater. Maybe our destiny is something greater. Maybe our purpose is something larger, more powerful, more influential, more joyous, more open, more free, more all these things, all these good things. Okay? So we have a dark curtain of history in culture and in our personal lives. Chances are it's something more amazing than what we could ever come up with. And I have a feeling it's probably something better. So embrace that dark, blank part and fill it with at least the hope of something greater. So we can become something greater. We can become what we have been destined to be all along. All right. So that's a little dark curtain of history. And thank you for spending a little bit of current history with me here on Living the Inner Life.